My name is Marenda Tucker. I live in Bend, Oregon, and I'm the product of fertility fraud. I grew up in Clarkston, Washington. My mom was a single mother. Actually, she was a single woman, and she went to a doctor named Gary Davis, who was located in Lewiston, Idaho, which is a just right across the river. It's a close-knit community with across two state lines. And she went to him. She was having some trouble. He encouraged her to have a hysterectomy, or he told her that she needed to have a hysterectomy, and she was devastated because she had not had the opportunity to have children yet. So he encouraged her to consider donor insemination in order to have a family while she still was able. He did the procedure for donor insemination. He told her that he was using donor sperm. He gave her a physical profile for the donor, and she approved that. And then she told me my whole life, I always knew that I was donor conceived. So I grew up knowing that. And then about 4 years ago in 2016, I put together the fact that my biological father was actually my mom's OBGYN. I had done an ancestry DNA test, a commercial DNA test, about 3 years earlier and had gradually gotten matches. Just as time went on, I got closer matches. So eventually I had a paternal uncle that I was matched to. And not long after that, I had a second paternal uncle that I was matched to. And at that point, I started just kind of researching who those people were, where they came from, who they, who trying to find out who could have been my biological father. And I realized that one of the brothers of that family, so one of the brothers of my paternal uncles, was my mother's OBGYN, Gary Davis. And at that point, put it together that he had used his own sperm to inseminate my mom. I kind of at that point went through some different possibilities. I wasn't sure if maybe she'd had a relationship with him or if she knew that he was the donor. So when I contacted her, I tried to just be understanding at first and let her know that I was just hoping to find the truth. And she was as surprised as I was. She was really upset that she had not gotten the donor that he told her that he would provide her with. And she said that she would never have chosen him if she would have known that that was his plan. She would never have accepted his sperm as the donor sperm, and she would never have wanted to participate in the procedure and have that done if she would have known that he intended to use his own sperm. So since then, I have found two half siblings that were both raised in the community that I grew up in. One was raised in Clarkston, the other was raised in Lewiston, Idaho. And neither of them knew that they were donor conceived until they were adults and did DNA tests. But both of them have now found out that their mothers were also told that they would use either donor sperm or a mix of their husband's sperm with donor sperm. And they were both, well, they're both my half siblings. So they both were given Dr. Davis's sperm. Then again, we all grew up in the same small community. They're only my half brother is 2 years younger than me. My half sister is 3 years younger than me, 4 years younger than me. My half brother and I went to rival high schools and had lots of friends who dated boys from that rival high school. It's a very small community. The chance that we could have accidentally dated is definitely just appalling to me, especially since he had no idea that he wasn't his father's biological son. So Dr. Davis actually had, when he moved to Lewiston, Idaho to start his practice, he had lost his medical license prior to moving to Idaho and did not disclose to the Idaho board that he had lost his medical license. And so he got an Idaho license, even though he had lost his previous medical license. He was he was included in a piece of reporting that won a national or that won a Pulitzer Prize in the 90s where they investigated doctors who practiced in the military after having a history of malpractice issues and losing their licenses and losing their malpractice insurance previously. And Dr. Davis was one of those doctors. He lost his medical license in Idaho after a series of malpractice cases were brought against him not long after I was born, to the point that he actually just shut up his office and left town. And my half sister was delivered by a different doctor because he was practicing when she was conceived, but by the time she was born, he had left town and closed his practice. So he had a history of bad choices and malpractice suits against him, and he had a history of losing his license before he even got to the practice where I was conceived. He went on to practice in the military and practiced his whole career. By the time that I realized what had happened, he was still practicing medicine in Afghanistan as a military contractor, and he still had a medical license. I would have liked for there to be a way for me to hold him accountable for his actions. And I spoke with lawyers when I found out in 2016, and I was basically advised that there were no legal options. There were no options for my mom to take to hold him accountable for the standard of care that he guaranteed to her in 1983 and did not uphold. And as I've talked to other people who are in similar situations that I am in, we are all absolutely shocked to find out that there's no accountability for these doctors. They still have medical licenses. Many of them are still practicing. Many of them still own private practices where they are delivering babies and inseminating women continually, even when these allegations have been brought against them. And they're actually very easy to prove, considering that we all carry these men's DNA. My hope is that our state can make some changes to legislation to provide an option for holding these doctors accountable.
That's awesome.
Is that good?
Yeah, I had a
The
question.
end.
I had a question for you. Was the profile that your mom's doctor gave her similar to him, or was it just totally?
No. So, funny story. The first thing my mom said, so my mom has dementia, so her brain just works a little differently now than it used to. But the first thing she said after I told her what I had found out is she said, "Wait a minute. He's at least a foot shorter than the guy I picked." So no, he was actually really short. And it's funny because my half siblings and I are all pretty short. I'm the tallest. Like even my half brother, I don't think is any taller than me, and I'm only 5'4". Um, so no, he was short and bald, and he did have dark hair. But I mean, my mom was told basically tall, dark, and handsome. Like it was all a lie, so it doesn't matter. I don't think there was ever a person that matched that description in existence, or at least that he had accessibility to their sperm. But no, it was a lie.
Does he have any children through a marriage?
No, he did not have any of his own children. And that was actually something that he discussed with my mom and my aunt, who also saw him. My mom and my grandma and my aunt all went to him for, their OB and just like OBGYN care. And they all remembered him talking about how he and his wife were not able to have kids. And he actually told them that it was because he was exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam, which I don't even know if that causes infertility. But so honestly, one of my first thoughts when I found this out was, because at first I just thought it was me. For 3 years, I did not know that I had half siblings from him. And that also made me not want to come forward with this information, because I felt like people were going to accuse my mom of just having a relationship with him because there was no one else, right? So, at that time, when I thought it was just me, my thought was maybe he just wanted a way to test his own fertility. Not like that justifies it, but that was one of my considerations for his motive, because I don't think you can have this happen and not wonder what they were thinking, like, why would they do that if they like, because people have said, well, maybe the donor didn't show up that day, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, so you sit your patient down and you say, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to wait another cycle. Like, you got 28 days to spare, it's not, this isn't a once or never thing,
You mentioned you
like
have,
women can get pregnant once a month.
yeah, you mentioned you have a half sister with your mom from your mother.
So I have a half sister and a half brother from my mother that I grew up with. And I have a half sister and a half brother who are Dr. Davis's kids, just like me. Each of them came from different families, and each of their parents went to him for help getting pregnant.
So I was just curious. So your mom didn't get the hysterectomy that he was recommending.
No, she didn't. So I think she'd had endometriosis, so she was having a lot of pain, and actually having a successful pregnancy kind of, I think, helped with some of that.
So it makes me question the doctor's motives, Dr. Davis's motives, because it seems
Yeah,
like he prompted her to get
he did.
pregnant with his child.
He did. And he basically gave her this ultimatum, like, either you have a hysterectomy now or you have a baby. And two women from the town I grew up in had, so part of the reason he left town is because he was sued by two different women who both were told that they needed to have their ovaries removed. Dr. Davis did it. He removed both of those women's ovaries. And then after the fact, the women both had doctors who had said before and after that they did not need to have that done. Like, that was not, they should never have had that done. And so they sued him. That's one of the lawsuits that is public. There's another lawsuit that involved a baby that died that is not public, that happened in the town that I grew up in. My theory is that he was sued enough in Idaho that he lost his malpractice insurance and was not able to continue to, I mean, your malpractice insurance will only carry you so far. If they're paying out, claim after claim, they're not going to continue to provide you with insurance. And so I think he lost his malpractice insurance. And that is why he went into the military, because you don't need to carry personal malpractice insurance as a provider in the military. The military, basically, you cannot sue your military doctor for anything.
Um, and you have children of your own. I mean, how does this discovery affect? I have children, and I think about, like, my medical history is not what I was raised to think, and it doesn't just
Yeah.
affect me; it affects my children. How did this sort of impact you with that idea?
I would say two things come to mind. The first is that every time you go in when you're pregnant to have a baby, you have this massive booklet of paperwork that you fill out that has your health history. And so sitting down, 4 different times filling out a health history where literally half of it is blank, as a pregnant woman, that's really scary. Like, I don't know if there's a history of anything. I just don't have a clue. Like, what what risks are coming from my dad's side of the family. Um, in addition to that, I have one child who has, so my husband and I both have hazel green eye, like hazily green eyes, and my youngest has brown eyes. And so when his eyes started to turn brown, it was kind of like, oh, where did this come from? And so I just assumed at that point that the donor, because I didn't know the truth, and at that moment, that the donor must have had brown eyes. And so then when I realized who the donor was and started to have all these really tricky feelings about um, my parentage on that side, I found myself looking at my cute little brown eyed boy, kind of thinking like, you're part of him. Like, you're part of this horrible person who did this really bad thing to my mom, but you're but also that's part of me,
Mhm.
it's complicated. It really is. And then to know that my biological father held me on the day that I was born and then just handed me off to my mom to just grow up my whole life without knowing him. I mean, it's a very bizarre situation. Like, he held me in his hands knowing that I was his child. I don't even know, like, how do you like, what can be understood about his thought process? Like, I just don't get it.
Has Dr. Davis passed away?
Yes, he has.
And so you have no way to really obtain you have no right to obtain his medical history, and you have no way to obtain it because he's passed away.
Can we go off the record?
I have one more question before you answer that though, and then
Okay.
I mean, I think it's important to know this. Um, have you gone to counseling over all this? How much has that changed you? Have you been in therapy so people know what you've had to go through since this
Yeah.
recovery?
So as soon as I found out, um I started seeing a therapist, mostly because I found that I couldn't rely on my friends to know how to handle this situation. I mean, it's just, I'm a talker and I process a lot of my feelings that way. And so when I first found out in 2016, I kind of just started talking to my friends about it. And a lot of them did not have, I mean, they said a lot of like wrong things because this isn't a normal situation. This isn't something that like just your average friend is going to have the right answer to. And so that was really hard for me. Like, it actually made talking to my friends actually made me feel worse at times because they, some of them would minimize it and some of them, gave me the spiel of like, oh, well, you should just be grateful to be alive, or like, you turned out pretty great. I don't see why there's a problem with this. And that was really hard. And so I just started going to see a therapist, and that helped a lot. But it it's not a solvable problem, and it's not. And I think that part of the reason that I have continued to see a therapist infrequently, but from time to time, is just that this doesn't go away. This isn't something that I can just like come to terms with and then move on, because every day that I log into my commercial DNA tests, I could have another sibling pop up. And I've had that happen. And it just brings this whole slew of emotions and feelings and hurt along with it. So, yeah, it is something that I've had to see a counselor for.
I find when I look in the
Thank you
mirror
for
sometimes
answering
it
that.
reminds me too, because you can't
Yeah,
get rid of your face, and
right.
half of who you are comes from that. So
Yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
question, Cara,
So, oh, go ahead.
I just want to ask Cara really this. She may or may not know this. Since this doctor lost his license and essentially, did illegal things in our eyes, is there any way that his records could be pulled on his clients, his patients? And I mean, HIPAA wasn't then, but I understand privacy. I mean, just because all those patients that maybe came in for, you know,
you would
OB
Artificial
hope
pills and,
insemination.
you
huh?
would hope that there would be a way to do that, but because there's no, I mean, what are you going to get a subpoena for? Like,
That's
there's
what I
nothing
want.
there, right? To get there's
Well,
no legal basis.
and my understanding is that it's the doctor's burden to keep records. And obviously he's not going to have kept records that would be incriminating,
And where would
right?
he be? I mean, basically, you want a
Yeah.
list of his patients so you
The
can go
list of
and.
the patients and who had babies by him,
Mhm.
that's what I'd be curious in, is how many babies he delivered in Idaho or where.
Yeah. And the other thing that complicates that, because I've had the same thought, like, I want to know how many half siblings there are. When I went public with my story, I actually had a friend that I grew up with, that I went to high school with, that I had a crush on in high school, reach out to me and say, my parents went to him. I know that they struggled with infertility for years, and then they went to Dr. Davis and conceived me. And they've always said it was a miracle. And I was like, "Oh, great. I definitely had a crush on you in high school and you could be my brother. That's disgusting." Um, and so I kind of talked to him at the time and just said, there are lots of reasons to get a DNA test just so that you know, no pressure, but I'd really like to know if we're related." And so he did do a DNA test and he's not my half sibling, but it just kind of opened my eyes to the fact that there were a lot of families in that community who relied on this doctor for care. And if I, you know, not everyone my age has done commercial DNA testing. And so if there are other half siblings out there, it'd be great to know. But because of the privacy of my two half siblings that I already know about, I can't really push that issue. Like I had gone to them and said, "Hey, I want to reach out to the local paper and just do an op-ed and say, this is what I've found out. This is what was happening in our community in the 80s. And and really encourage anyone whose parents went to Dr. Davis for fertility help to do a DNA test so that we can kind of, flush the situation out." But both of them were really uncomfortable with that idea. One of my half siblings has not even told their parents that they found out that that the doctor used his own sperm, because they just don't even want to go there. Like it's such a touchy subject. Just donor conception is such a touchy subject. And a lot of the kids that are my age that were the product of donor conception were not told by their parents. And so they're kind of finding out and having to confront their parents about that issue, which causes a lot of grief. And so then to find out that, oh, actually, not only did I find out I'm donor conceived, but I found out that your doctor used his own sperm. Like a lot of kids are just, there were not kids, a lot of adults, in order to save that relationship or to prevent, further trauma, they're just not willing to confront their parents about that reality. So it's hard because I don't have a lot of out of respect for my half siblings who are in the same situation that I'm in, I have not pushed that issue.
What year were you born?
I was born in 1983.
Okay.
So my doctor his practice was open from I think 1981 to 1988. And the siblings that I know of, we were born in 83, 85, and 88.